experienced, dedicated attorney whose practice focuses exclusively on criminal defense. You should not try to go it alone. If you or a loved one stands accused of any kind of criminal matter, Tony Moss is ready to put his 29 years of experience to work for you. Just call us at 877-547-9407 or visit our website at www.tonymosslaw.com. We have offices in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and are available to assist you throughout the state of Florida.
Yeah, I sent him over to my...
Okay, we're back here live. We have a new show topic, new sponsor, and boy, this is another tough topic, criminal law. And we've got a real specialist with us because last week Tony let me know that he was in classes because you specialize in death cases.
That is one of the areas that I've been focused on during my career, yes.
Well, let's welcome Tony Moss. He's an attorney. Now, you're out of Miami, but you practice in Palm Beach and Broward and, of course, Dade County.
Correct.
Tell us about your practice, Tony.
Okay, well, a little background. This coming Tuesday will mark my 29th year
Wow.
in criminal practice.
You look, wait a minute. You look too young.
Thanks, you made my day. Yeah, I started with the public defender's office in Miami under Bennett.
Oh, my gosh.
One of the outstanding.
Did you ever get any sleep?
It was.
I heard
sometimes
Dade
I had to fight
County
for it.
criminal law is the toughest, that there's just so many cases out of Dade County.
That's true, but the flip side is we have one of the most experienced and most dedicated cadres of criminal defenders you can find anywhere in the country.
That's right, with all the cases you have.
So it was a great learning experience. I got exposed to, a variety of different approaches and techniques from guys both within the PD's office and out in private practice. And eventually in January of 91, New Year's Day of 91, I hung out my own shingle, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Wow. Did you know you wanted to go into criminal law?
Since I was a kid.
Wow. Amazing.
What happened was, and you'll find this on my website on the link.
By the way, you got a great website. I loved your website.
Thank you. But when I was in junior high in 1971, there was a very notorious rape case in my hometown in North Carolina where 3 young African-American men were arrested for allegedly raping a white female. They were all convicted and they were sentenced to death. This was back before the Furman decision in 1972, where a lot of southern states had the death penalty available for rape. And of course, it was disproportionately applied against African Americans accused of white females. So as the case proceeded, it became a microcosm of a lot of the issues that unfortunately still exist in the
You followed the case?
Today. As close as I could, being 13, 14 years old.
Because that had to be big news in North Carolina.
It was. When the case went to trial, the only black people in the courtroom were the defendants and their families. There was no white jury, white judge. All the attorneys were white.
What year was this in?
This would have been 1971.
Oh, wow.
So having that kind of up-close view of the proceedings made me very conscious of the kind of systematic injustices that were taking place during that time. But then at the same time, there was also a outstanding cadre of attorneys from Thurgood Marshall to Charles Hamlin, Houston, William Hasty, Julius Chambers, guys who were at the forefront of the movement for equal rights and human rights for African Americans.
They sure weren't back in the 70s, were they?
Not back then.
Wow.
So having the exposure to those individuals gave me the reason to believe that this could be a potential calling, and being in the criminal practice would be a natural outlet for the kind of activism that I was feeling at the time.
Okay, so now you practice law in all 3 counties.
Right.
And is there an area that you really enjoy practicing in?
Well, I enjoy doing federal work.
Okay.
Both on the trial and appellate level. In fact, I was while I was waiting to come on the air, I was getting prepped for an appeal in a career offender matter that's going to be pending in a few weeks. But probably the most challenging area in all the time that I've been practicing is in the death penalty realm. That was another lingering aspect from the case that I saw before. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, the death penalty field is probably the most emotionally and intellectually challenging of any area of criminal practice.
That has got to be just overpowering. I mean, someone who's up possibly could put to death.
Exactly. I mean,
and you kind of have their life in your hands.
Literally,
to put it, yeah.
Literally speaking, because the typical death penalty defendant, his case is going to be investigated by the most experienced detectives on the force.
Right.
The case will be prepared for trial by the most
state has all the money.
They have all the money, they have all the resources, and they have the weight of public opinion behind them, especially in high-profile cases. So the amount of resources that they have at their disposal that we as defense attorneys have to counteract is immense. That's one aspect. And then on the other one, in Florida and under federal law, first-degree death penalty cases are the only cases in which the jury gets to decide punishment as well as guilt. So in order to convince the jury to spare the life of the client, we have to be able to reconstruct the client's life story and to present the story to the jury in such a way that they understand that regardless of how horrible his acts may have been, that this is still a human being who has value to somebody.
I was going to ask you, how do you do that, Tony? I know, listen, we're all human. Mm-hmm. And I know this guy is guilty, what he did, but I have to save his life. It's got to be tough to do.
Actually, it's not tough at all. I look at my position as holding the state accountable for the weight of the resources they plan to bring to bear.
But it's like David and Goliath, though, isn't it?
It feels that way sometimes, yes. But it's certainly a necessary component of the justice system, and I have been very fortunate in all of the capital cases that I've handled since 1991. Not a single one of my clients has ever been sentenced to death by a jury. I take that back. I had one, my second trial early in my career, but
still,
yeah.
Look how long you've been in practice for.
And besides, the judge in that case overrode the jury recommendation for a variety of good reasons, so that client was spared death row. I've got an undefeated record.
You never know who's listening to the show. I mean, we just found out today because the show is also on Facebook.
Right.
We've got 55,000 people who watch the show. Here we are. We're on Twitter, and the station has got a huge audience.
Sure.
Hopefully we can use this kind of as a teaching show too. Like, I have a question that what is going on today? It seems like kids.
Mm-hmm.
I would never disrespect a police officer. I was afraid of police officers.
Right.
But, I mean, listen, there's bad policemen. I don't want anyone to think that I'm just taking one side. But what is it with kids today that makes them become so bold with the law?
There could be any number of answers to that. A lot of it is peer pressure, obviously. And
people they're with.
People they're with. Social media, for better or for worse, has helped perpetuate quite a bit of.
You're seeing people on social media commit crimes. They put it on Facebook,
right? Which I've always found ludicrous, especially these guys who are convicted felons and know that they're not permitted to possess firearms, and they show up on Facebook with an AK-47 in their hand, laughing about it like it's a prop for a Halloween party. Those things do leave me shaking my head, I have to admit.
As an attorney that you're representing your client, do you also see sometimes you have to become maybe the father too? As to, what you did was wrong. Okay? Now we're going to have to do something, and you might go away for a while, but you don't want to just come out and go right back to what you were doing before.
There is an aspect of counseling to that, yes.
Because you're older, you're smarter, you're more educated.
Right.
And now a lot of kids don't even have a father.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, what I have to advise my clients, because I've noticed this especially in federal practice, is that they may not be advised. Like if they come in state court and enter a guilty plea on a charge because they're only going to get maybe 2 or 3 days credit time served, and then they're right back on the street. What they don't learn quite often, but what I have to advise them is that, listen, one reason you've got to really stay on the straight and narrow once you get out is because if you come back in the system, not only could you be looking at an enhanced sentence if you're convicted for something down the road. But if your case gets picked up in the federal system and you're subject to career offender sentencing or Armed Career Criminal Act, depending on the charges, you could be going away for some serious time.
Wow.
It's going to be a lot more than just maybe 21 days for credit for time served. You could be going away 15, 20 years up to life, depending on the extent of
What
your
would
record.
you say to parents that are listening right now who have teenagers when their son or daughter are pulled over, how they should act?
With the
Right or
utmost,
wrong?
with the utmost respect. With the utmost respect. Keep your hands on the steering wheel if you're driving, so the officer, as he's approaching, can see that you're not reaching for something that may be a gun. When he comes to the door, he's going to ask you probably for your license and registration if it's based on a traffic stop. You provide them and make sure that he sees that you are not reaching someplace that you shouldn't be.
Comply?
Comply, but if the officer tries to ask any questions about a specific crime or whatever it is, don't answer.
Okay.
That's where you have to be very specific that you don't want to answer any questions without an attorney being present.
I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes
Oh, you have no idea.
and
you have
makes
no
your
idea.
job so much more difficult.
It does. Too often we have people who think that they can talk their way out of getting arrested, or that, if they just deny over a period of time, it's going to wear down the detectives or the investigators and they're going to cut it loose, when actually it's the exact opposite. If anything, those denials are just going to provide extra incentive for the investigators to turn up the screws. That's how a lot of
What
false
about-
confessions come about.
Is it DWI or is that what it's called here in Florida? Is it DWI or
DUI. DUI.
So if you're pulled over, and from what I understand is two people can have the same amount to drink, but it affects one person more than the other.
That is true.
So just because you say you only had one drink and you're going to drive, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get pulled over and they could find, that you've been drinking.
It certainly doesn't mean that you would not be impaired.
So what do you do if you're pulled over and you have been drinking? What do you say or what don't you say?
Well, I don't do a whole lot of DUI work, but basically what I can tell you is that you don't talk, you don't give a breathalyzer, and by all means do not do field sobriety exercises.
Do not do it.
They are not tests. They are not scientifically verifiable. They're not required. You can have your license administratively suspended for not providing a breath sample on breathalyzer, but you cannot have a suspension for not doing FSEs.
Wow. That's amazing. See, we're in Boca right now. These people have these big parties. And look, there's judges have driven home here that had been drinking who were pulled over, who were taken off the bench.
Right.
This is Delray and Boca. I want to also get into drug possession, too.
Okay.
What's the drug of choice nowadays?
It's a cyclical thing.
Because we keep hearing heroin is just...
That has been making a comeback, especially with the crackdown that we've been seeing recently with the pill mills that were providing prescription medication.
That's right.
We had a rush of cases in Broward a year or two ago involving Flocka. And, of course, there's always going to be powder cocaine, crack cocaine. Those are kind of staples. But that brings an area that I do want to mention about Miranda rights. One of the big misperceptions about Miranda. If you watch any Hollywood production, you always see, right? Well, not necessarily cops, but any kind of fictional show, even if it's based on, you'll see the arresting officer, the minute he puts on the handcuffs, immediately saying you have a right to remain silent. If you give up that right, that never happens in the real world.
They don't have to do that?
Not necessarily. The only time Miranda is required is if the person is in custody, meaning they're not free to leave the police's presence, whether or not they've been formally arrested, and B, if the cops plan to question the person about the crime itself. So in a drug case, for example, it could be a a trafficking case where the cops execute a search warrant and find massive amounts of cocaine or whatever the case may be. They may decide at that point that they don't need to question the people involved because the evidence to make the case is the drugs and whatever evidence they find to show occupancy of the premises. So in that case, if they don't have any interest in questioning the person, they don't have to read Miranda at all.
Wow, that's right. I always thought you have to do that, and if they don't read your rights, you could be set free.
Not true.
Wow.
And even if there is found later on that there was a Miranda violation, that doesn't necessarily mean the case is going to be tossed. It would mean that person's statement might be kept out of evidence, but if there's other evidence that can prove the defendant's guilt, that evidence could be totally admissible. That happens all the time.
Let's talk about, because a lot of people don't know. Let's do drug charges first.
Okay.
And maybe it matters. I know I'm not talking about marijuana now. I'm talking about heavy drugs. Mm-hmm. You're arrested for the first time. What could happen to you?
Well, if it's first time,
is it state or federal? First of all,
well, I'll start with state.
Okay.
Depending on the quantity of drugs found,
that's what it's based on, the quantity.
Right, usually, or the nature of the drug. Like for example, possession of cocaine in any amount is a third-degree felony.
Okay.
Right.
And tell me what that means.
What that means is you can be punished by up to 5 years in prison.
Wow.
But if it's a first-time offense, you may qualify for some type of pretrial diversion. If you have a underlying drug problem and you're looking for assistance, we have a drug court in Miami-Dade, which is one of the standout drug courts. It's been a model for similar courts nationwide. It was creation of late Janet Reno.
What makes it so good?
Because there's a treatment aspect to it. It doesn't handle these cases strictly from a criminal standpoint, but the individuals are subject to drug testing. They go through counseling. They're put into 12-step programs. The families of the individuals are also included because the court recognizes that quite often addiction is a family disease. So it's a more holistic approach to hopefully get the person out from under their addiction and get them back on a productive track.
Hey, we're going to go to break right now. Give everybody your phone number at your office.
Sure. The Miami-Dade number is 786-219-5467, and the toll-free number nationwide is 877-547-9407. Or you can reach me by email at tony@tonymosslaw.com.
Right. Well, we're going to come back with more with Tony Moss. He's a criminal attorney here in South Florida. We're going to go to break. We'll be right back.
Tony Moss is a criminal defense attorney who has practiced in the South Florida area since 1988. The Tony Moss Firm, LLC, handles a wide variety of state and federal criminal matters, including financial fraud and white-collar crimes, violent felonies, drug crimes, firearms offenses, pre-arrest investigations, and criminal appeals. It's not your job or your loved one's job to deal with law enforcement in a criminal case. That job should be handled by an experienced, dedicated attorney whose practice focuses exclusively on criminal defense. You should not try to go it alone. If you or a loved one stands accused of any kind of criminal matter, Tony Moss is ready to put his 29 years of experience to work for you. Just call us at 877-547-9407 or visit our website at www.tonymosslaw.com. We have offices in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and are available to assist you throughout the state of Florida.
Okay.
Hey,
yeah, hit me up with the question about the one-loss record.
Okay.
That's good.
We're here with attorney Tony Moss. Why did I say for some reason I want to say Ross Moss.
It happens.
He's a criminal
from time to
attorney
time.
out of Dade, but you practice in Broward. You have a lot of cases in Broward, and you just told me about one you got in Margate, and you practice in Palm Beach County, and you probably get calls from all over the state.
I have at various times, yes.
Well, you've got the experience. Now, can I bring up about your one-loss record? I mean, I'm a baseball guy, you know? So,
well, I do get that question from time to time, and my answer is pretty much the same, that one-loss record in criminal defense is not simply a matter of how many acquittals and how many convictions you get at trial. And the reason for that is that every case is different. You know, the factual patterns are going to be different. You're never going to get the same jury twice for obvious reasons. The legal issues that may be presented with different types of evidence or those kinds of things, they all vary from one case to another. And a jury is always a wild card, no matter how thoroughly you may feel that you vetted them before they serve. You never have any control over what happens once the door to the jury room closes.
So every case is really different.
Every case is really different. And also, what some people what qualifies for a win can be something other than an acquittal. I've had a case a few years ago with a gentleman who found himself charged with a first-degree murder, along with a couple of other guys, based on a drug ripoff that went bad. Now, this client's role was very limited. He helped prepare a flash roll, a stack of cut-up newspaper with a couple of $100 bills on the outside to make it look like they had money to do a deal. He provided the car for his two co-defendants to go to the scene where the ripoff took place. They didn't even take him to the scene because they thought that three people there might look suspicious. And he helped divide up the marijuana afterward, and he kept a couple of pounds. Had he gone to trial and been convicted, he would have been looking at the same life sentence without parole that the other two defendants would have been looking at who were actually at the scene. So in that case, we were able to get the plea down to 15 years in prison. By the time the case was up for trial, he'd already done 5 years. So, and there was no minimum mandatory.
It takes that long?
Sometimes, especially in a case because one of the defendants in the case was eligible for the death penalty, so that stretched out the process. And then when you're coordinating discovery depositions and you've got 4 different lawyers involved, the 3 for the defendants plus the prosecutor, sometimes that can be a very drawn-out process, getting those depositions coordinated. But they're a critical part of the investigative process. So those delays do happen in homicide cases, but it's not common for others.
So murder cases are not like the O.J. Simpson where they take 8 or 9 months. What's the normal length of a murder trial?
The longest one that I've ever done was my first death penalty trial, which took about 3 to 3.5 weeks for the first phase, where the jury was deciding guilt or innocence. The clients were found guilty as expected, and then the penalty phase, I believe, took about a week.
That's not very long.
No, it's not.
Wow.
It's not. The Simpson trial should never be looked at as a benchmark
Right.
for anything that goes on in the typical system.
Tony, why do I see young men and you find out they've been in the system 10 or 15 times? I mean, they look very young.
Right.
How do they get through the system? In other words, I guess they go to jail. How do they get out so fast?
Well,
Where they can go back on the streets and do another crime.
Well, you see that more often in the state system because the caseloads are so overwhelming. The prosecutors have to prioritize, which cases are more deserving of their time and resources, and quite often they're willing to extend deals to guys who have been in jail for about 20 or 21 days. They're looking to get out as fast as they can. So it's kind of a case management tool, and a lot of people, inside the system and out have issues with that. But quite frankly, without plea bargaining, the system would collapse on its own weight.
Right.
Probably, I'd say between 85 to 95% of all criminal cases resolved through pleas, depending on your jurisdiction.
Tony, what's it like when you have a client? They're really a good person. You can tell they have a good heart.
Right.
This is the first time they've committed a crime. I mean, they screwed up.
Right.
How tough is that for you, knowing that they're going to do some time? And our next show, I want people to know what it's like doing time. But how does that affect you?
I would be lying if I said that it didn't affect me at all.
Well, you're a good guy.
Yeah. For example, I have a client over on the West Coast who found himself the driver in what he thought was just a run with him and a couple of buddies to go buy some marijuana from a guy in Cape Coral. It turned out that these guys had a ripoff in mind, but by the time he found that out, he was in too deep. They were on their way to the house. As a result of the ripoff, the dealer was shot and killed.
Oh,
The client is 19 years old, had no priors whatsoever, but because of the nature of the charge and because it was as part of a robbery, he's facing the same charge of first-degree murder and armed robbery as the other three, including the guys
19.
who set it up at 19 years old. And I expect that we'll be able to get that case resolved short of trial. But from the discussions I've had, he's going to be looking at double-digit time in state prison as part of a plea. And that, it's kind of wrenching, I have to admit.
It's
But
got to be.
It can be, yes.
We have a couple minutes left. Tell me why somebody should hire you.
Well, two reasons. One, because as I mentioned before, my experience in the death penalty field. If you can handle that, you can handle pretty much anything else that comes through the system. And the second thing is that I maintain hands-on control of every aspect of the case, from pre-arrest investigation all the way up through trial and sentencing. But I do have a very extensive network of expert resources and investigative resources that I can tap into at any time. But I'm the one who's at the forefront. When you call my office, unless I'm in court or meeting with clients in the jail, I'm the one who answers the phone. I can go to your home or office or workplace to discuss issues, but I try to be as accessible as I can. But I bring 29 years experience to the table.
Wow.
That counts for a
Give
lot.
everybody your phone number.
Okay, again, the main number is 786-219-5467, and the toll-free number is 877-547-9407. And I do have offices in Miami-Dade and in Broward. The Broward office is by appointment only.
So you've been doing TV and radio all your life, right? You really did a great job today, and Tony's going to be back with us again next month. And man, I love having you on the show. I think sometimes, if you can just touch one person,
Exactly.
it's amazing. And I really, what you do is amazing. We will be back again next week at 5 o'clock with more Ask the Experts. And please tune in, and you can actually go to Tony's website, which is
www.TonyMossLaw.com.
and soon you'll be able to watch today's show. You'll be able to come back. Thanks again, Tony, and
Thank
we'll
you,
see
Steve.
everybody next week.
Sounds good.